Welcome, everyone. This is Dempsey Durrell Spears, your Black YouTube therapist. Here today, I will be doing a professional presentation today. I'm in therapist mode. I am not into the effery today. I will highlight how today's presentation will be structured, how it will be facilitated, and how your participation will be granted towards the end as as it relates to a question and answer session. We will not have a panel today. I also would like to let everybody know that I will uh, engage into another live stream later tonight, probably around between 8 and 9 p.m. tonight. Depends on how I feel, depends on other things that I have going on to prepare for the following week. Um, I will give a brief intro that involves my experience treating our community with the diagnoses of schizophrenia and other psychotic spectrum related illnesses. Today's presentation will be somewhat of a summary as we look at the schizophrenic spectrum of disorders and how it presents itself within the normal aggregate of African American culture, whether it's urban or rural areas, mid city areas, and abroad. I will give a technical description and meaning to what schizophrenia means, and I will talk about from my own clinical experience and training my experience of what I have observed and treated with individuals diagnosed with schizophrenia. And I will highlight things that seem to be representative, highly representative, or prevalent to the African American population that involves this illness. I will go in detail as I describe individual cases that I have treated. I will talk about things from my own experience, from a clinical standpoint. I will talk about the treatment, the assessment. I will talk about programs that are related to helping people with psychotic disorders. I will talk about how individuals with this illness, how they have an effect or negative effect on their communities and, more importantly, their immediate families. I also will paint a picture to kind of illustrate from relative to a psychosocial standpoint of what schizophrenia means to the community and to the person who experiences this illness, and how they're treated and how they are attempting to make sense of the world. I will talk about, in many instances, how, from my experience, most people who develop schizophrenia may have incurred certain symptoms maybe 2 or 3 years before they even inquire about receiving any type of medication treatment or any type of counseling related treatment. I will in somewhat talk about the efficacy of facilitating therapy in conjunction to psychoactive medications and other community orientated programs that through research has shown to have a high affectability on minimizing the occurrences of psychotic episodes. I will also talk about the myths that are related to schizophrenia, spectrum disorders, schizophrenia itself, as far as people thinking that people with schizophrenia behave a certain way. I want to also caution in my synthesis of this information that schizophrenia has insignificant effect on a person's intelligence. Let me repeat. Schizophrenia, according to any reputable research, there is no significant effect of schizophrenia, even though there are some levels of cognitive distortions. It has little to no effect on someone's intelligence. Just because someone is schizophrenic does not mean that they have an intellectual deficit or an intellectual disorder. And I will highlight in my review of the diagnoses or features that relate to schizophrenia how certain illnesses are ruled out if there are occurrences of certain symptoms. We want to understand that schizophrenia does have an hereditary or genetic influence. There is some level of predisposition based on genetic information given by both parents, even though it may lie dormant within one or more parents, and it can be passed down to a child. Before I get started, I'd like to say hello to each and every one of you in the chat. Miss Queen Sunkiss, I see Vida Boogie, Miss Nicole Marie, who's mowing her yard at the moment, Mr. Chaos Rain, who will be going live at 6 p.m. today, Butter Love. I also see who else is in here. Sheila E, the Quiet Storm. What's going on, Miss Sheila? I saw some of I was watching from the clouds over the weekend and some of your content. So I wanted to preface that as I go into detail on this information. This particular video was requested by some of the people that I know that have family members who are experiencing schizophrenia or any type of schizophrenia related illness. There's a spectrum of psychotic disorders. And I'd like you to understand that I will list those. I'm not going to go into detail with each, but there's a schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorders that are all interrelated. They all have certain similarities. How are you doing? Sometimes I get carried away. Appreciate you for being here. I also will reference content in reputable organizations that can give you more information as it relates to the presentation today. Some of the statistics. This is by far just a summarized explanation to what schizophrenia means and how it affects the community, how it is treated. And in between that, I will inject my own clinical knowledge and experience with treating schizophrenia. I was told by a person that I had some level of psychosis. And I also was told by some ignorant person that I am not qualified to treat people with psychotic disorders. Although my credentials, which you see on the screen, and I have others that I did not list, allows me to do so. Now, before I get started, I'll read this. Nicole Marie says, I know a man that was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He he said from the military and had extreme high IQ. He was extremely volatile and very dangerous. Yes, a person with schizophrenia can be very dangerous. And I will talk about how that can present itself. No, the psychotic cannot treat the psychotic. Now, I'm going to go ahead and bring up the information here. We're focusing on schizophrenia in the Black community. Today's focus is on schizophrenia and how it presents in the Black community. Now, the information is going to be relative to the country itself as it evolves, the diagnoses and the prevalence of mental illness. And then I'm also going to talk about things that are exclusive to the African American community, particularly my own experience in treating. I'm also going to talk about the misdiagnoses of people that have been misdiagnosed with schizophrenia because they may have had another form of illness or some other type of diagnosis that may have been medical induced. I also want you to understand that in some instances there is other also outside sources that have a significant effect on a person's behavior, and I will kind of shed light to that on how medications can trigger psychotic symptoms. A medical illness can also trigger, and side effects of medications and also drugs. Illegal drugs can elicit behaviors that will present themselves similar to a psychotic disorder. Okay? Now, we're going to go here. As you can see, we're going to move along here. Wow, it's pretty small. Okay. All right. Now, we're looking at schizophrenia, spectrum, and psychotic disorders. Now, I'm not going to go into detail with every one, okay? But I will go into detail with schizophrenia disorder and also schizoaffective disorder. The reason why I will highlight and focus on those two, because in the normal aggregate of our community, a large percentage of people who are diagnosed with an illness in the schizophrenia spectrum will have schizophrenia disorder. They will have schizoaffective disorder. If you look at schizotypal personality disorder, very, very rare to be diagnosed with that personality. That's actually a cluster A personality disorder. Delusional disorder. You will see some people diagnosed with that again. It's more laden with the fact that they have delusions without necessarily having other hallucinations and etc. I also want to point out to everybody, we will have a Q&A session after I'm finished. So I would like you to reserve all questions till the end of the presentation. I don't want to answer questions while I'm presenting. I prefer to present the information first, and you can highlight your questions afterwards so I can ask each question so that the presentation can be given in a more smoother manner. Okay. Now, I talked about schizotypal personality disorder, delusional disorder, brief psychotic disorder, which is more associated with a short-term with a short-term level of experiencing psychotic symptoms. Okay. you're basically experiencing a symptom of delusions, hallucinations. There may be thoughts of persecution, jealousy, and things of that sort. But it's for a duration of maybe 1 month or longer, and you only have to have one symptom. In order to be diagnosed with schizophrenia, you have to have at least two or more symptoms, and that's the difference. Now, I also would like to help you understand that for people to be diagnosed with a lot of these illnesses that you see that are in the schizophrenia spectrum, some only require one symptom, others require two or more. When you look at schizophreniform, that disorder in itself is almost identical to schizophrenia itself. However, the duration is what changes in the intensity of the symptoms. Now, we're going to talk about schizophrenia. I'm going to, not go into detail right now because I'm going to discuss the diagnostic criteria and features. We're also going to talk about schizoaffective disorder, which I am going to go into detail, but not as much as schizophrenia because there are differences that involve affect or mood related behaviors that a person's behavior is affected by how they feel based on their mood, whether they're depressed or they have some form of mania, which is basically mood instability. Again, also, as I talked about substance abuse influences, there are substance medication induced psychotic disorders, meaning that you either took a illegal substance medication, it was not done through some level of neurological dysfunction, it was through something that you consumed that gave an effect. Catatonia associated with another mental disorder. Again, in being catatonic, there are issues with how you see a person's movement, their psychomotor skills. Okay. This is what you may see when they show those movies where a person's in a straitjacket and they're moving all crazy and their mouth and their face is all disjointed and things of that sort. That's more of I say theoretical. That's more of a theoretical influence. I'm sorry, not theoretical. That's more of a theatrical representation of what that means. But somebody's body movements are all bizarre and so forth. That's what we're talking about when we talk about catatonia. And then we look at catatonic disorder due to another medical condition, meaning that there was a mental illness that contributed to that. Okay. I have had numerous clients who've had some type of catatonic symptoms. Then we're talking about unspecified catatonia, which, if it doesn't meet the criteria of, let's say, movements of the mouth, the face, the body, if it has things outside of that, or you just can't necessarily, it doesn't fit one of the check boxes, then it's unspecified. Okay. Then we look at other specified schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorders, which is others that is mentioned, meaning that if the illness doesn't necessarily, it's you can't necessarily fit it in a box, then you use unspecified. I made a mistake in specification. I got to correct that, so that's just a small mistake error there. Also, unspecified schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorders. Okay. So, for the most part, when we are evaluating the differences are comprised in areas of intensity, duration, meaning one or more or less than one or more uh, months or weeks, we're also looking at how these symptoms act concurrently with one another. We're also looking at that. Okay. So I just want to highlight that. Now, again, I'm focused today on schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder, and the reasons why is because in our community, when you see people who have some level of schizophrenia or within that family, I will guarantee you that they will be diagnosed with either one of these disorders, schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder. That is almost guaranteed. Of my over 20 years experience in this field, these are the two illnesses that you will see the most. You will not see delusional disorder. You will not see, now you will see illnesses like delusional disorder or brief psychotic disorder or substance abuse related in hospitals when they're being treated or admitted to hospital. Those are basically used in a provisional manner, and then they may be changed based on more information. Now, you will see some things with for somebody being having catatonic related associated with mental with associated with a medical issue or condition. You may see that again in hospitals. Now, schizophrenia diagnosis. Now, I want to highlight what you see here is the criteria. This is not D-Durrell criteria. This is DSM-5-TR, which is basically a revised version. The DSM was revised, I think, last year, or maybe the year before. I think it was last year. And probably in the next 2 or 3 years, there will be a DSM-6. In most situations, when they create a diagnostic statistical manual, they create a version and then they revise some things based on research. The criteria itself for schizophrenia is as follows. This is the criteria, and I will explain what this means. Now, there has to be 2 or more features. They must be present. They have to be operating concurrently, interacting with one another. We're talking about delusions, hallucinations, which is pretty much the most recognized symptoms that people can recognize. That when people think of schizophrenia, more from a layman's perspective, they think about hallucinations, they think about delusions. Also, disorganized speech. Now, I want to talk to you about disorganized speech because before I do that, I also want to explain when we're talking about hallucinations, we're talking about auditory hallucinations and we're talking about visual hallucinations, meaning someone is seeing something that's not there, or they are hearing voices, or they're hearing some type of stimuli, and it cannot be validated, confirmed by somebody else. Okay. Delusions is more of thought patterns that are not necessarily true. They are not reflective of reality. Disorganized speech presents itself in this manner. A person may say a sentence in which there are two or more unrelated issues that are going on. For example, a person may speak to you and say, I am going to the store, but I seen a spacecraft landing on the house, and it had some unforeseen person coming out of it. These are the kind of things they may say. Also, they may say things that rhyme. They may say things that, like, seen the floor. I went to the store. I seen the ground. This thing was round. You're gonna hear thought processes and sentences that don't make any sense. They're disjointed. They're gonna say phrases that are not concise. They don't make any sense. There's two or more scenarios that are going on in one sentence. This is how a person with schizophrenia with disorganized thought patterns, this is how they present themselves. They may talk about playing sports, and in the midst of talking about playing sports, they may say something about basket weaving, and then from the basket weaving went something about politics, and then their health, all in one sentence. Saying things that are not necessarily reality. Saying all types of bizarre statements. This is how disorganized speech presents itself from a person that is diagnosed with schizophrenia. You also have disorganized or catatonic behavior. Catatonic behavior. And so when we talk about that, what we're talking about is body position. Okay? We're talking about different phrases that they may present in their face, their eyes, their arms, legs. This is stuff that people in the movies, they pretty much are very theatrical with people in a straitjacket, or they're in a hospital moving around or spinning around, or they're sitting still and not moving at all. Or they're kind of like in a trance, just looking in one space for hours and hours. This is all atypical behavior outside of the normal range for a human being. Also, we're talking about negative symptoms, lack of emotion and expression that comes from someone who's diagnosed with schizophrenia. They're showing negative symptoms. They're showing an inability to express themselves, or, basically function. It's the emotional expressions are greatly diminished, or they don't occur at all. It's like no one's there. They're almost like a zombie per se. Number two, so I wanted to understand, let you understand, some people are classic cases of schizophrenia where they will have delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, disorganized behavior, and negative symptoms. They may have all five, and some may have two, some may have three or more. In many instances, most people that I have treated have had delusions, hallucinations, and disorganized speech. That is quite common. Okay. From my clinical experience. Now, someone may say they've seen other things, but I've seen where they definitely have delusions and hallucinations. And those are, to me, when people are reporting in the assessment phase, delusions and hallucinations are the most reported symptoms. Number two, disturbances will cause lack of functioning at work, relationships, self-care, and academics. Now, what I'm stating here is when we talk about disturbances, we're talking about these symptoms, the symptoms that we talked about. Two or more of these symptoms cause an issue with you functioning in your day-to-day life. At work, meaning you have difficulty working with people because of your behavior, difficulties concentrating, difficulties operating in reality. Because the basis of psychosis is that you're experiencing things that are not necessarily real. So it will cause issues with you completing job duties and tasks. You're going to have issues with your interpersonal relationships or work relationships, other forms of friendships, because you're going to present behaviors that will be seen as out of the ordinary from people in your environment. And what happens is that due to your inability and people not understanding what's going on, they may isolate themselves from you or avoid you or act in ways that you don't see appropriate, that is not consistent to how they treated you prior to having a psychotic episode. Most people who have this issue also don't understand the seasons. They may dress with with zero clothes or very little clothes in the wintertime, and or in the summertime they may dress as if it is 10 degrees outside. I have witnessed this several times, not often, but I have experienced incidents of people not dressing appropriate to the seasons, not dressing appropriate to the weather. And due to the sensory aspect of having a psychotic disorder, they actually think it's cold when it's actually 95 to 100 degrees outside. Or when it's wintertime, they're thinking that it's 90 degrees outside. A lot of times when people experience psychosis, most people will experience some level of psychosis between the age of, I would say, 18 in their early 30s. A very small percentage experience some level of psychosis in childhood or in adolescence. It's very difficult to diagnose a child with childhood schizophrenia because it's very difficult to determine whether or not the child is fantasizing or they're actually experiencing um, some level of delusion or hallucinations. It's very difficult, particularly with children that with adolescents 13 above. I probably, from my own experience, may have treated somewhere around maybe five or more, maybe five, 3 to 5 kids that had childhood schizophrenia in their teenage years. I think a few of them were, the few that I can think of, they were between the ages of 15 and 17. I had one young girl, female. She was about 7 or 8 that exhibited some forms of psychosis, very rare, and it was hard to determine whether or not she was imagining things, playing around, or it was very difficult. Uh, but those are the only examples that I can think of in my uh, 24 years of experience. Consistent signs of disturbances lasting for at least 6 months. Now, I talked to you all that in some of the illnesses, if you can revert back, some of these illnesses here, like brief psychotic disorder and delusional disorder or schizophreniform, it may be a month or more, but to actually fit this criteria, it has to last for at least 6 months. Okay. Now, in most situations, people who experience these symptoms don't quickly get help. Most people they don't understand what's going on with them, and they attempt to put on a facade as if nothing is wrong with them, and they begin to hide or not communicate that they are experiencing these symptoms. Particularly young adults who are diagnosed with this mental illness, most have told me that they start experiencing these symptoms at least 2 years before they decided to come out and get help. At least 2 years. That's on average. Most of them have told me at least 2 years. Very few clients that I've had that developed schizophrenia did so just volunteering to get help. The majority of those situations came about because they were hospitalized and their behavior deemed that they get more intense treatment for the most part. Also, when we talk about academics, we're talking about kids who may have problems concentrating, whether they are in school in high school, college, I had one of my most severe cases of schizophrenia was a guy that I knew that was in college. He was in tech, and he had a severe psychotic episode about 2 or 3 months before he was getting ready to graduate. He was a brilliant, one of the most intelligent men I ever seen in my life. Knew everything about computers, knew about programming, he knew about all about information technology, but he had a very severe bout, very, very ill. He was very, very ill, and he was unable to graduate, and he never was able to graduate due to his illness. It was sad because he had a very promising career. He worked very hard. He was like top 5 in his class, and basically he decompensated to the point that he could no longer function and go to school, and he was forced to come back home and receive treatment. Next feature: possible diagnosis of schizo. You have to have in a possible diagnosis of schizoaffective, depressive, or bipolar disorder ruled out. I made another little error. I said fueled out, but it's supposed to be ruled out, meaning that, and this is something. And I'm glad. I'm glad I looked at this. This is one of the main issues that I have to educate people on when it comes to schizophrenia. Is that we have to understand when we're diagnosing people with illnesses, certain illnesses have to be ruled out. As so many times, I may have a client, a family member, someone say, "Oh, this person is bipolar, schizophrenic, major depression, or this person has this and that, or they have major depression." I say, "No," I have to pause and give level of psychosocial education. You cannot have schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder at the same time. You cannot have major depression disorder and schizophrenia. You can't have bipolar. Although, in looking at things as far as a differential diagnosis, meaning you're going to see similar symptoms, a person with bipolar and psychotic features can highly resemble someone who has schizoaffective or schizophrenia. But they have to be ruled out. Okay? Part of that diagnosis is that the mood-related episodes, the mood-related occurrences have to be excuse me. Excuse me. They have to be absent. Okay? The next symptom: a disturbance is not caused by a physiological affect or of a substance, medication, or medical condition. So what they're saying is that the disturbance cannot be caused by some level of your mood being influenced by, again, I'm going to preface, medication, drugs, or a medical condition cannot be involved in a person experiencing psychosis. It cannot be involved. Okay? So the disturbance has to be absent of those things. It has to happen organically due to brain functioning or whatever else. Number 6, in addition, diagnosis of schizophrenia is given if delusions or hallucinations are prominent over other symptoms of another disorder, such as Asperger's spectrum disorder or a communication disorder. Meaning, delusions or hallucinations, if there's another disorder, like say someone can have, if they have Asperger's or if they have another mental disorder, the hallucinations and the delusions have to be severe. They have to be more prominent than the other illness. Okay. Now, just wanted to make a point of that. So this is not, I want you to understand, when you're diagnosing someone, it takes skill. This is something that takes skill, and you get better and better at it the more you do it. This is not something while people running around YouTube self-diagnosing, people running around YouTube thinking that they know what narcissistic personality disorder is, and this person has this and they have that, and everybody's projecting. These things take skill. It takes you reviewing information, clinical observation. There's an assessment called the BPRZ. I'm sorry, the BPRS, which is the brief psychiatric report of symptoms, that in which you can measure or test for schizophrenia. So and I've actually utilized the BPRS in some of the things that I engage in as far as treating people in determining their level of, if they could be diagnosed with schizophrenia. It's basically a screening. Didn't take a long time. I'm sorry. It's the brief psychiatric rating scale. I'm sorry. And in the brief psychiatric rating scale, you're going to be asked a host of questions, and you have to basically check off and rate if those symptoms are prominent enough. Okay? So you have to have 2 or more of these features along with the other 4 things that are listed. You have to meet the criteria. This is not you watching someone on TikTok or you watching someone on social media saying, "Oh, I'm schizophrenic because I saw this." No, it doesn't work like that. A official diagnosis has to be done in a scientific manner. Now, I'm gonna go through schizoaffective disorder. I'm not gonna go as detailed as schizophrenia because the topic today is schizophrenia, but I wanted to highlight to talk about schizoaffective disorder because, again, when we look at people who are being diagnosed or who have chronic psychotic features and illnesses in that family, they're most probably going to be diagnosed with schizophrenia first, and then schizoaffective disorder second. Now, so I'm going to review that, and I want you to understand within schizoaffective disorder, there's a bipolar type, and then there's a depressive type. So the diagnosis consists of features that involve a major mood episode of depression or mania. Okay, and that's what they mean by a bipolar type or a depressive type. You have to have one or the other. Okay, it's not primarily focused on hallucinations and delusions. It's more about the mood, about you experiencing those psychotic symptoms in the midst or at the same time of being depressed or being in mania. Okay, delusions and hallucinations for more than 2 weeks with the absence of a mood disturbance during the lifetime of the illness. Meaning, those delusions and those hallucinations have to happen for at least 2 weeks without there being a issue with your mood. So you may go 2 weeks without being depressed or manic, and you're just simply having those symptoms, one or the other. Also, the symptoms meet the criteria for a mood episode and is present the majority of the time. Okay, so that means you have to have a mood episode at some point, but you just can't have it. It has to be absent for 2 weeks, but at some point, you do have to have some form of a depressive or manic symptoms. Also, disturbances is not attributed to effects of a substance, medication, or illness. Again, you're going to see that a lot if you study the DSM for those that are in this field or those who are studying to be in this field. particularly with the DSM, you're going to see that repetitively as it involves diagnoses, because we have to understand that there are substance abuse effects, drugs, illegal drugs that affect your cognitive functioning. Medications can give side effects that can also to do that. And then also you having certain illnesses can cause you to have issues. Okay. In the Black community, I want you to understand most of our people who are diagnosed that go to the hospital, they're released, they're put into group homes. Some of them are going to be homeless. And I'm going to talk about the statistics that relates to us, because there's a high correlation between mental illness and homelessness. Black people make up 37% of the homeless population. They're more likely to be mentally ill most of the time. Due to the fact that we're only 13% of the population, but we almost make up 40% of those who are homeless. Now, there's all types of influences that contributed to our people being homeless, but I want us to recognize that the lack of family support, the lack of job skills, in addition to mental health, produces the outcome of people in our community being homeless. The mental health aspect contributes to that. Now, when we look at schizophrenia overall, 0.3% or 0.7% of the US population has schizophrenia as far as being diagnosed. Now, there's also a level of misdiagnoses that I will discuss as it relates to Black people, ADOS. The onset usually occurs between late teens and early 30s. Same thing for our community. It's pretty much the same. Most Black people who develop schizophrenia usually develop schizophrenia in their early 20s to 30s. Now, I also would like to help you all understand the lack of access to mental health services also contribute. There are people who, if they may have had one form of mental illness, but because they lacked or had access to mental health services, they eventually developed some level of psychosis based on the fact of never getting any type of treatment. So in essence, what I'm stating is that there are people who in our community, due to lack of access and racial disparities, probably had a lesser form of a mental illness that may have had mild related episodes of psychosis, such as having major depressive disorder with psychotic features, or having bipolar with some mild forms of psychosis. And due to the fact that they were not receiving treatment, they eventually may have developed schizophrenia. I would like to point out to each and every one of you, some have stated in the chat that they have family members who have mental illness or have schizophrenia. One of the best ways of preventing further severe mental illness or recovery is early treatment. Not waiting 3, 4, 5 months or deciding to do this and that. Is that the quicker that a person receives that treatment and is consistent, there is a better outcome long term. 2.1% of African Americans develop mental illness, and is the highest among all demographics. So what that is basically stating is that when I look at the statistics, it stated 2% of Black people, 2.1%, 2.4%. It all depends on who is reporting it. When you look at the Hispanic community, it's like 1.5. For white people is maybe 1.3. Asians is I think it's the lowest among Asian community. But for black people, it's 20, 30, 40% higher. Some of that is genetic, and then some could be environmental. Now, let's also understand there could be other influences. A lot of African Americans live in highly polluted and toxic environments. There's a lot of toxic things in the air. The water, I guarantee you, if you look at Flint, Michigan, or any other highly dense African American area where there's a lot of pollution, I guarantee you there's a high correlation between the pollutants, a highly pollutant area, urban area, and mental illness. This is something that I have seen a lot, particularly with ADHD and ADD and other illnesses. I the earlier part of my career, I grew up. I received my training in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Baton Rouge, Louisiana, is one of the most densely polluted areas on the Mississippi River. It has a high level of cancer. It's a cancer cluster, but there's also a high level of mental illness and people having mental health related issues, whether it's by mental health. I mean, just basically the mental health is affected, whether it is by the environment, due to the pollutants, and also their drugs, and lastly, a medical condition such as cancer. There is a large percentage of highly dense areas of African American people that it's highly polluted areas. Pollution affects mental illness long term. So we have to look at all contributors to mental illness and why certain illnesses has a higher level of African people being diagnosed. 2.4 times likely to be diagnosed than any other group. Now, give or take some. When I was looking at the National Alliance of Mental Health and WebMD, I also looked at a couple of other the ACA and APA, kind of looking at some articles. Basically, somewhere between 2 to 3%, if you want to be conservative. I just basically just said 2.4%, kind of in between. But you'll see anything between 2.1 to 2.52%. Some may say 3, but it's somewhere between there. I gave a middle, more of a moderate statistic on that. ADOS is more likely to be misdiagnosed than any other group. Now, I'm going to revisit that as we go through here because this is not just relative and constricted to schizophrenia. This is also the same, I think the same level of misdiagnosis is happening with autism, spectrum disorder, and it is also happening with ADHD. Okay? There's a large misdiagnosis of ADHD that occurred that I began to notice in the 90s, the late 90s. It really occurred in the 90s and early 2000s. And then I started noticing in 2010, 2015, people were all of a sudden, all these kids began to be diagnosed to be autistic. And then now I'm noticing, and schizophrenia has always been, heavily misdiagnosed. That's just not to just black people, but to everybody. But there seems to be a significant high misdiagnosis of that illness than any other illness. Now, and there are racial influences to that, how you're being perceived. It also relates to the fact of the communication or lack thereof as far as the person that's being assessed. Let's be honest, African American people don't trust state agencies. And it is due to historical reasons. We don't trust them. A lot of people, when dealing with them, have an adversarial um they have an adversarial mindset. And that's just the facts. They don't like interacting and being asked all these questions. They don't like being treated that they're less than. So there is some standard error of estimate that does occur, standard error that does occur in assessing African American people and why we're being diagnosed with this illness. 20% of the homeless population have schizophrenia. 37%, as I stated, of the population is black, of homeless population is black, and a large percentage have a mental illness. Let's focus on treatment, because I'm going to revert back to some of the things I talked about and talk more in detail. The medication, treatments, we're talking about psychopharmacology, we're talking about therapy, we're talking about community-based and rehabilitation programs that have been deemed positive in treating schizophrenia. The problem with and when it involves the African American population is access to these treatments. Being able to qualify for Medicaid or Medicare, having insurances, having proper medical facilities nearby, utilizing public transportation. And also one untold issue as it involves mental illness is just simply having an ID to get services. Let me repeat. There is a large percentage of mental health clients, particularly African Americans, that lack and are unable to get certain services and navigate the community due to the lack of a ID, a driver's license or an ID card. I know this for a fact because I have spent years since 2004 to 2009 helping people get ID cards. And once I went into business for myself and began doing more case management and community related work, I have had numerous clients that talked about the lack of having an ID, the lack of qualifying or being able to go to certain institutions to buy their medication or get a discount due to the lack of an ID. Common treatments, medication-wise, antipsychotics treat psychosis. Haldol, Prolixin, Thoraxin, is actually Abilify. I put Abilify, that was a mistake. Clozaril, Zyprexa, Latuda, which is a new generation drug, Geodon, and Risperdal. Now, most of the clients I have, they're going to have one of these illnesses. Now, Haldol, in my opinion, from my perspective, is the most effective from what I've seen my clients respond, particularly getting Haldol shots. You have to do labs and other different things too when you're getting those injections. I would say Haldol shots to me is the most effective. I've also seen Zyprexa, it's very effective. Geodon and Risperdal. I've seen those four as being, to me, have been highly effective. Now, again, I am not a medical professional. I'm clearly stating this from my own clinical observation for those who are taking those drugs and the improvements and the stabilization over time of these clients consuming these drugs and being treated under the supervision of a medical physician. Other therapy related services, as I stated earlier, individual therapy, which is basically classic therapy, traditional therapy, be individualized, family therapy. I would like to definitely highlight the importance of having family therapy because it is overwhelming for a lot of people maintaining their homes with a family member who is diagnosed with schizophrenia because you can it can be very difficult from day to day, hospitals, other appointments. It can be very emotionally overwhelming. Also, what can be emotionally overwhelming is seeing the decompensation over time of that person not being the person that you grew up interacting with. They're no longer themselves. They're like a totally different person. They're a shell of themselves. They're totally operating in a non-reality based world and environment. Also, psychosocial skills training. Psychosocial skills training can be facilitated by a non licensed professional. You have to have at least a minimum of a bachelor's degree, or you have worked in with a high school diploma. You've worked in a certain, depending on the program, to do the skills training for at least, for the most part, I think maybe 2 to 5 years, depending on the state and the program. Um, I actually have non-licensed clinicians who do provide case management and psychosocial skills training. They all have a minimum of a college degree. Uh, my opinion, I don't agree with. I have a certain standard. I don't agree with having uh, people with a high school diploma with years of experience providing that service. I do think those who have at least a college degree in a helping profession or a psychology or behavioral related field, um, the experience you get in certain knowledge of the field and also doing an internship, which some may get involved in, that to me is a training ground that will qualify you to be more equipped to provide those services because you are being exposed to the diagnostic aspect and also theoretical aspects at a lower level as opposed to someone who's just learning on the go experience on the job. Not negating it, but that's just my perspective. Vocational rehabilitation services to me is very similar to the psychosocial skills training, but it focuses more on getting a person work ready again or to be viable in the workplace, doing job coaching, learning job related skills, or rehabbing themselves to maybe transition themselves back at some capacity, whether it's part time or in a less stressful work environment, so that they can be productive. I do believe that these, in my opinion, these type of services are very effective because it allows people with this illness to feel whole again, to feel productive, to have some level of self-worth by being able to obtain and keep a job and earn money. Maybe not at the level that they once did prior to the onset of the illness, but to have some semblance of independence to me means a lot to people with this illness because it is very debilitating, where you can be highly dependent on others to pay your bills, to wash your clothes, iron your clothes. Some you have to help put on their clothes. Remember to take your medication. You can't, cooking for you, there are some people who can't do anything on their own with this illness. So if you can improve in some aspect of back to normalcy, to what you knew it to be, it could be seen as very rewarding. Now, also, and understanding this, most people who have this illness will not truly rehabilitate where they never experience the symptoms again. I would say less than 2% of people who experience a psychotic episode only experience it once or have a brief period and never deal with it again. Never do it again. That's highly unlikely. Now there are those. There's also a small percentage who are able to work again in their field of study at a high level. Very small percentage are able to do that. If you watch the movie A Beautiful Mind, the guy was a mathematician who had schizophrenia. It took him years to be able to work again as a college professor. And there are many instances of that. I have had very few clients with schizophrenia that were able to work consistently. And those that did, of those very few that were able to work consistently, they were very few, even lesser percentage were able to work in their normal field of study or field or their normal field that they were able to have a decent lifestyle. Many of them were having to retire early, or they had to draw Social Security and have benefits in order to live off of. Now, I did have a decent percentage of clients who were able to hold jobs. Walmart is notorious and very helpful in hiring people, like other thrift, like Salvation Army and thrift shops, Goodwill thrift shops. They also have a tendency to hire people with mental illness. And then that's other different companies too. I have hired from time to time people with mental illness. I've hired at least, I think, one, two, maybe three clients, and since 2010, I've hired people that had mental illness, that I had known mental illness, and they worked for me part time. Some, and I think one worked for me full time. There are some that are able to do so, but the majority are not able to do so. That's just the reality. References related, you can check the DSM-5 TR, the National Alliance of Ending the Homeless, WebMD, PsychomNet, National Institute of Health, American Counseling Association, and the American Psychiatric Association for the information that I have presented today. You can, basically can go back to that. Now, before I do that, I wanted to kind of go back to the statistics in the homelessness. And I want our community to understand. You go to California, and I will guarantee you, not gonna say guarantee, but there's a highly likelihood that if you go to Skid Row, a large percentage of those African American people have a mental illness. And of that, a lot of them probably have been untreated and they lack the ability to have access to services. This is one of the main reasons I wanted to speak to our communities, because we need to understand the telltale signs of mental illness, and we have to get out of these myths of thinking because you have an issue that automatically means you have the worst of the worst type of mental illness like schizophrenia, because schizophrenia is the most severe form of mental illness. But if you're a person who merely is overwhelmed and experiencing some level of anxiety or some level of depression, I beg upon you to please seek some form of mental health services. I also want to encourage you, when you're interacting with a person who has psychosis or schizophrenia, please do not challenge their beliefs. Please do not challenge the validity of what they're experiencing. The best course of action when a person is experiencing a psychotic episode is to lead them to a safe place. Call 911, Do not challenge and tell them you don't know what you're talking about. Why are you saying that? You're stupid, you're dumb, you're crazy. Quit saying these things. Don't say those type of things. Facilitate the situation in a manner to get that person help. And so what I'm stating is that when a person is saying, oh, I'm seeing the devil, or they're having thoughts of grandeur, and they have powers and all these other different things that they're acting in a violent manner, please facilitate it to call 911 and to talk in a monotone, calm manner to get them to relax, and we're going to get help. If they say that they're seeing things, say, okay, I understand that you're seeing this. Okay, I understand that you're hearing that. Even though you're hearing that, so-and-so, client A, can you please, I want you to just relax. I want you to have a seat. Get some water to cool down. Do not challenge and argue. Do not call them names. Do not curse them out. Do not ignore them in the midst of a psychotic episode. Talk them down so that they can be relaxed, so that when the help is coming, they can be there to apprehend them, to get them the help that they need if they need to be hospitalized. And so as a person, I've done a lot of crisis intervention. And I liked it. The only thing I didn't like about crisis intervention that it was a 24-hour on-call job per se. Whenever I had it, you basically, I did it every 6 weeks. For every 6 weeks, I had to work for not 6 weeks, is every 8 weeks actually. We were rotating 2 weeks at a time, and in those 2 weeks at a time, you basically were on call from 5 in the afternoon after you got off of work to 8 o'clock in the morning when you had to go to work. Between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. when you're working, you could not, you were unable to, when you're working, you would be unable to provide those services because you could just call the office. But after work, between those times, that window, you had to be available no matter what to answer those calls, document it, and to talk a client down. And you experience, and there are a lot of clients who had schizophrenia who would call. They were highly irrational and irritable because of medication running out, lost medication, or they were experiencing a psychotic episode and they didn't know what to do. And so I basically had to utilize clinical skills to help them calm down, regain focus, and wait for help. And in some of those instances, I had to actually go on site, assist them, and call for help. Okay? So I just wanted to point that out. In our community, this thing about praying, and we're going to pray. Listen, I believe in prayer just like the next, but I also believe the fact that God created things to help people, and prayer alone is not the answer. Okay? These people need help. In the Black community, the Black church, there's a high tendency for people to overlook and look down upon mental illness, particularly those that may have schizophrenia and those type of illnesses. This is the most severe form of mental illness in the DSM. Let me repeat: schizophrenia, psychotic schizophrenia spectrum disorder. Those are the most severe because it has your inability. It's related to an inability to function in reality, along with other things. Now, I gave the references. You can definitely take a look at things. I'm going to go ahead and look at the chat, and I will start the Q&A session. The Q&A session will involve me answering questions. But before I do that, let me say hi to people in the chat, and let me say hey to everybody. I'll say hey to Miss Queen Sunkiss. I see Vita Boogie, Chaos Rain, Nicole Marie. Let's see who else was in there. Carrie Ann, I saw. TMK Media said, I've been waiting for this topic. Hopefully, you do one on anxiety and depression. Don't mind doing that. Butter Love said, I also seen delusions of grandeur and paranoia. Yes, those are also symptoms too. Those are other negative symptoms that do occur. There is a form of well, in the DSM, they don't necessarily highlight it as such, but paranoia and thoughts of grandeur are actually some of the symptoms that are related to schizophrenia and other psychotic illnesses. Um, it actually manifests itself as a symptom of disturbance in that process. People may experience paranoia. They may experience thoughts of grandeur or things of that sort. You know, there was a term that we used to use: paranoid schizophrenia. That was catatonic schizophrenia. That was undifferentiated. You know, there's different labels of schizophrenia um, that were labeled, but the DSM-TR kind of reduced it to just being, you know, no telling what they'll do the next time, but they kind of reduced it to just being plain old schizophrenia without putting a specific label on it. But if you are able to assess um, that, we'll make note of those symptoms. Okay. Butter Love also said, "Son kiss while psychotic. No, any job duty would be pretty important. Okay, psychosis. Any okay. Let's see what else is in here. See Juju. What's going on, Juju? I see Jess Jocelyn Kimmy. That's Jess J. What's going on, girl? Mike V up in here. Angie Munzar, Sugar Bomb, Miss Furlow. Appreciate you for being here. Terry the Notary Public. JJ Kimmy. She said, oh, I was wondering why I've been talking to myself. My comments not showing. Either way, have great presentation. None Swirl Zone says schizophrenia hereditary. Yes, schizophrenia can be hereditary. It can be a genetic, can be produced. You can inherit it genetically and develop the disease. Okay. Now, this is the Q&A session. You all are able to ask what other questions you like, as it involves schizophrenia. Let's see. Well, somebody else said something. They highlighted about schizophrenia and intelligence. Okay, Butter Love stated there are studies that note heightened intelligence is connected to a higher prevalence of mental health disorders. There are some studies that do allude to that, and there's some studies that don't, but there is some truth to that. Particularly that I know I've seen some very, very intelligent people who were diagnosed with schizophrenia. I also seen people when we had the diagnosis of Asperger's, they were highly intelligent, but they changed it and they just made it autism spectrum disorder. They took Asperger's out because they felt like Asperger's was a milder form of autism. Okay. I also would like to. Oh, okay. Hold on. I see someone asking a question. What's going on, Golden Black 189? She said, I've been listening, Brother D. Durrell. Make me think about the videos I've done in family in my life. Thanks. Thank you. And I'm just listening. No problem. No problem. I'm here to do the psychoeducation. I want to note that I know I had one person that talked to me about the symptoms that their family members had, and I want you all to understand: a person who has schizophrenia is not always going to act out in violence. Actually, most people with schizophrenia are not violent. And if a person who is violent with schizophrenia, it's because they do have a certain level of paranoia, and they may be delusional, and they may have thoughts of persecution. We're talking about thoughts of grandeur, which is you doing all kinds of things and that you're really not able to do. But you also have thoughts of persecution, particularly religious persecution and things, thinking someone's out to get you, thinking someone's out to harm you, somebody's going to kill you if you don't pray to God, or if you don't do this type of act or have this type of religious value. Um, there are a lot of psychopaths, like the son of Sam, Summer of Sam. He was a psychopath. Brother Love said, and looking at this, which do you believe in more prevalent, black men or schizophrenia, or black women? Now, I was looking at that, and I didn't see significant difference in black men and black women. In the studies, some had it pretty close, but what the DSM stated was that when you look at it from an overall perspective, there tends to be a tendency for more women to be diagnosed with schizophrenia. So I'm going to also assume, because of that, there's probably slightly more women in the black community, but there's not a significant difference. So when I say there's not a significant difference, what I'm stating is that it's probably under 5% difference. It's not a real difference that causes for an evaluation of why so many more black women are being diagnosed than black. It's almost equal, but it's a little bit more lenient towards the women. Non-Swirl Zone said, I may have missed it, but why do you think blacks are overdiagnosed with schizophrenia? Great question. I can tell you why. Number one, the questions themselves that are used, that there are some cultural biasness as relates to the questions, because there are some of the questions that may be asked, particularly in a person's functioning in a certain environment. Like, say, for instance, if a person is functioning in an urban environment, they may deem certain things as being paranoid of, or delusions of that, as far as you thinking of the police a certain way, or you thinking of interacting with someone a certain way, as opposed in other communities, identifying certain aspects in that community may be seen normal. Also, you also have to look at the fact that some of the people, the professionals who implement these appraisals and assessments, have a negative thought process about African American people, and they're a bit biased in their scoring. And along with that, there could be some verbal exchanges and treatment that can be experienced. So, and this goes in healthcare and also in mental health. There are a lot of African American people, not only with the lack of access, but once they get access, you may experience some level of institutional racism. None Swirls On said, I may have missed it, but why do you think? Oh, okay, I did that one already. I thought you said, oh, all right. All right. It's the Q&A session. Okay. I'm going to wait a couple more minutes if there's any other questions. If not, I'm going to end the live. None Swirls On say, wow. Yeah, I mean, you have to understand, when you're asking those questions, depending on the environment you live, if you lived in a highly volatile environment, you may not answer those questions based on what the majority of the coach of the country may answer that. Dealing with authority figures, a person in a highly volatile environment may act a little bit more aggressive towards people of authority, as opposed to someone who lives in a very stable, low crime area. A person who is in a high crime, high intense, anxious environment may act, a little bit more aggressive and unwilling to do what somebody says, or they may have an instant negative psychological reaction to certain people. And I seen this highly prevalent. I don't want to talk about PTSD, but there are a lot of black people who have PTSD when hearing police sirens, as opposed to the white community when hearing the police. That's a sign of safety. But to a lot of black people, the sign of the mere sound of a police vehicle, the siren, is maybe a sign of cover of not being safe. The same thing for schizophrenia. Now, TMK Media said, I missed the answer to mine. I have seen some therapists make drug recommendations on the first session, and others who will state that a deeper eval is needed first when dealing with clients. It all depends on what they're assessing you for. Like medication, if a person is requesting is referring to you get medication, there has to be some glaring severe issues that they have observed or some things that you've stated for them to state that. From my perspective, I refer medication when I see that a person is unable to function in multiple domains, life domains, or multiple environments. If you have issues functioning at home and at school or at home and work, and it's the same issues in each environment, I may propose medication in conjunction to therapy. JJ Kimmy stated, I asked earlier about people dressing inappropriate for the season. It is because they is a disruption in their sensory process. Yes, I did actually talk about that, JJ Kimmy. I talked about that when I was explaining the criteria and how there is a lack of social awareness, and in a state of psychosis, you're not understanding what is real and unreal, sensory related. There is a disruption in what you may see, what you may hear. As I talked about visual and verbal hallucinations, I talked about being delusional. I also talked about feeling and smelling things that are not necessarily the case. So yes, that is a possible disruption of the sensory process. Chaos Rain stated, my question, how much is a epigenetic is the factor for trauma living in America that is the cause of mental illness, including schizophrenia? I don't know what epigenetic means. What I will say is that genetics does play a part in you developing mental illness, but it's only for certain illnesses. It's not for all. For instance, schizophrenia has a hereditary genetic link. Bipolar disorder does. Major depression does. Autism has a genetic effect. Schizophrenia, it may have a genetic effect. Intellectual deficient disorders. Intellectual disorders also have it. So, certain ones, most, I don't. Well, I'm gonna say I don't know the percentage, but I'm gonna say there's a small percentage of mental illness that can have a genetic link. None Zone said that just goes to show the need for more Black mental health professionals. That's correct. We only make up 11% of the mental health professionals in the country. Josephine stated, shout out to Josephine, the chat builder. She said, I was waiting for this topic. Appreciate you. Check out you can check out the replay, or you can reball back to the beginning. None Squirrels on said, I for one would prefer a counselor who looks like me. You have consumer choice. Josephine said it's genetic and environmental. Yes, it can be genetic. It could be either or both. It could be genetic without environment, or it could be environmental. I actually talked about environmental circumstances such as pollutants, things like that are in the air, water, the lead poisoning, things of that sort. There are genetic and there are environmental influences to mental illness. Epogenetic. I don't even know what that is. I don't know what epogenetic means. I see epigenetics. Oh, epigenetic. Oh, epigen. Okay, that's what I was about to say. I did not know what that is. Oh, yeah, that's studying how your behavior affects with the environment. Um, that changes how I'm gonna say that's outside of my field of study. I'm not. That's not my lane. That's outside of my uh field of study per se. I can only talk to it relative to the mental illnesses that are associated with it. But as far as that field of itself, that's outside of my lane as a clinical counselor therapist. None swirls on said, I would like to see more research on environmental stress and schizophrenia. We're constantly under everyday stress. I would encourage, if you want to merely look at it from the standard of just for African American people, I would encourage you to look at content and look at a website called the American Black the Black Psychological Association, BPA. If you look at the Black Psychological Association, they have research that is mainly focused on the Black community, and you're dealing with Black psychologists. Perfect. Yeah, there are plenty of studies out there, but I would suggest going to the Black Psychological Association. They have a plethora of research solely dealing with the African American mind in research. Okay, but I did enjoy doing this content. Let's say, yeah, drugs. She said, "Does drugs induce schizophrenia exist?" Yes, it does. Earlier in as I reviewed the criteria, Josephine, I talked about the criteria for psychotic disorders, and that we have to understand that there is medical induced psychosis, uh, drug related, medication related, or medical illness related. So there are other influences, but you have to understand that in order to be diagnosed with schizophrenia, it cannot be drug induced. It's going to be something else. Now, what usually happens, from my experience, is that, and I've seen this happen before a lot of times, where somebody claimed that a person went to a party or something. They got somebody put something in somebody's drink, and they never were the same. I have known multiple situations of that occurring where somebody went to a party or an outing and they had a drink and they were never the same. And a lot of those people are going to be diagnosed with schizophrenia depending on how long the behaviors last. Again, it has to be over 6 months. Now, there's also other psychotic disorders in the schizophrenia spectrum. They could have a schizophreniform disorder or some other delusional disorder potentially. But if not treated, it can present itself long term as schizophrenia. That does happen. I have had numerous situations that have happened to young adults where they went to a party or they went to some type of outing, they had a drink, and they were never the same. Yes, I've had many situations like that. Yeah, that is sad. It's very sad, but it's the reality. It happens, and I know for a fact. I caution young people all the time, with my daughters. If you're going to drink, make sure you have your own drink. If you leave, throw that drink away. Don't leave your drink around anybody. I don't give a damn who it is. Buy your own drinks. If somebody buying you a drink, you watching it. You don't let anybody just come and give you a drink. No, you need to see it being made yourself. Again, Chaos Rain has a live stream at 6. Y'all can go check that out. But that's the reality of schizophrenia in the Black community. Yes, in the Black community, I know a lot of you all have family members or so on that this person is the odd person out that usually acts in very bizarre manner and is treated a certain way. But that person deserves to be treated with respect. That person needs to get the proper treatment, which is therapy or any type of skills training, vocational rehab, but more importantly, psychopharmacology treatment. That is a reality. That is a reality. So, with that being said, guys, I again you hit my cash app for this very valuable information that I gave you all today. You can donate to Darrell77. Hit the cash app at the bottom. I actually enjoyed doing this. This is the content that I originally was supposed to do on YouTube. And then I got caught up in all the effery. And then I started enjoying talking about all kinds of other stuff. But I do enjoy from time to time doing real content. Um, uh, some of the effery is becoming exhausting for me. And I can tell right now there are people that want to keep me in a certain mindset. These people want me to constantly beef and say all kinds of things, and I just don't have the time for that. And a great point earlier about family. Yes, family therapy is very important because when you have a family member who has a mental illness, the whole family is affected by that. Dealing with a person with a mental illness, particularly like schizophrenia, can be very, very emotionally exhausting. It can disrupt your normal day. There are some people who get so overwhelmed that they resort to putting their children in facilities, or they're the adult, in particular as an adult, they're going to go to a group home or some type of independent living facility. There's also respite services for those that need a break due to this. JJ Kimmy said it's hard seeing someone you know one day become a totally different person. Yes, that is horrible. I have seen it. I've seen families struggle with it. I've seen other people develop because of their inability to deal with their loved one. They end up having some level of mental illness because they were stressed out, overwhelmed, had no place to go. Then they began to see disruption in their own life. That's just the reality. And so it's incumbent upon me as a therapist, as a psychotherapist, to make them aware, to put them in the right position, and to give the proper referrals so that they can seek the help, even if it doesn't mean them seeing me. Okay. Well, that's going to be the end of the Q&A session. I think I've answered pretty much enough questions on that. You all asked some very, very good questions. As far as the epidemiology of mental illness, again, that's outside of what I study. That's not something I'm trained in, but there are environmental influences. I know I have witnessed environmental influences on mental illness. I've seen that with clients, particularly early in my studies. I would see I would see a lot of kids that had leg poisoning, particularly growing up in a cancer cluster in Baton Rouge. I mean, not growing up, but my early adulthood. A lot of issues of cancer, other related issues that affect the mental health. I want to give a shout out to Josephine for the $50 cash app. She said, for great topic, and we'll catch the replay. Appreciate that. Appreciate Josephine for the $50 cash app. Appreciate that. That's the chat builder. Now see the chat builder. The Umar sector want to build now. I hope so. In order for them to build, like I stated, they gotta clean house of certain people. And also what they can do is they can stop doing content about me. they doing content about me singing in front of a vehicle they can't even afford. Anyway, okay, dementia. None swerves on said maybe you could do something on dementia in the future. Sure, I mean, if you all request things, I'll do it. I don't have a problem doing content and you request it. So Nick, I'll tell you what I'm gonna start doing. I'm gonna make Sunday my educational day. Josephine laughing. It's the facts. Like I may make Sunday my life solutions day of talking about a particular uh, diagnosis and how it affects the Black community. Now, when it comes to dementia, uh, man, dementia, and Josephine got some requests. I'm gonna also say, guys, for everybody that has a request, I definitely don't mind doing it. You can also email me at amburn1718@gmail.com. And I will do any. I'm be honest with you. There's very few mental health related topics I can't talk about. Very few. Or I don't have experience. So if you want to have requests, like I love doing requests because it gives me a purpose to actually talk about what I do on a daily basis. Right now at my day program for adults, which people think that I don't have, I probably have about 2 or 3 clients that are over the age of uh, 55 to 60 that have dementia, or they have some form of that type of illness. Okay. Oh wow, I got another cash out from Ms. J. Shout out to Ms. J for the $10 cash app. She said for great stream, no shutout needed. Oh damn. Damn, I did it. Sorry about that. Okay, but she did. Oh wow, she gave some very good topics. Now I'm definitely going to enjoy talking about these topics. JJ Kimmy, she said, I definitely would love to see you do presentations on EMDR, CBT, and DBT. Now, of the 3, Ms. JJ Kimmy, CBT is that's my therapy. I use that more than anything. I have dabbled with DBT in the last 5 years. When I was in school, dialectic behavioral therapy, which is basically a offspring of CBT, I never really trained in that formally, but I have did some CEUs and I have done some continuing education on DBT. And I will be, matter of fact, I have a DBT booklet and I'm going to talk about that. I definitely will enjoy doing that. Now, EMDR, which is the eye desensitization, I forgot what it is. It's with eye movements. Now, I have a psychologist that I worked with for years who actually specialized in EDMR. I didn't really learn about EDMR, which is basically called the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and it's basically used to treat trauma for the most part, memories of trauma. And what it does is basically relaxes your thoughts, your inhibitions, your feelings, your affect is relaxed. You're in a relaxed state in which you're recovering memories and thoughts and dealing with trauma. That one I'm gonna have to do a little bit more research. Now I can talk endlessly about CBT and even DBT to a certain extent. Now the EDMR, I will consult with a couple of people on that. I have seen it done. I've never utilized that form of trauma. The way I treat trauma is through trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which is where I treat sexual abuse, physical abuse, things of that sort. But I can definitely talk about all 3, and I will definitely do that on Sundays. Sundays will be the professional day for Coach D, for therapist D Durrell, and I'll do presentations. Golden Black 189 said, I like to request for you to speak on levels of autism spectrum disorder. Wow, that's another one that I definitely enjoy doing. And I have talked about these topics before. Particularly, I'm gonna be honest with you. I was not happy with uh, the DSM taking out Asperger's disorder and making it autism spectrum. And so when you're talking about the spectrum, we're talking about levels of autism that involves um, um, low levels, moderate levels, profound levels of autism, all the way to mild. And so what I'll do is talk about each level, and I will talk about the criteria of that. But I definitely would do that. Y'all actually came up with some really, really good topics that I definitely will enjoy doing content on. She said, "Yeah, that's my kind of stuff. I get excited." EDMR, I never, I've seen it done, and I've trained with a psychologist that I work for who does it. So I'm gonna use that perspective. She said, "Nice. It would be awesome for a professional to present the information. I definitely will." She said, "I just ramble. I'm not a professional. My therapist trained others to do EMDR. It helps. Yeah. Um, ED, for what I've known, people who have actually um trained in EDMR actually had great outcomes. For myself, I've just been so comfortable with doing cognitive behavioral therapy or trauma focused um cognitive behavioral therapy is just you know, when you're involved in the mental health world like I am, um you will look at other new things to add and supplement your skills, and you do it through continuing education, um and things of that sort. And when you're constantly seeing clients and doing therapy, and then you know you're doing other things, and then from my perspective, because I'm on the business aspect of things heavy, where I'm in the point of trying to build and programs and make money and do other things that can help the community. You get away from the treatment stuff as much, expanding yourself treatment wise. And unfortunately for me, once I got into business, it became more business, even though I still do a lot of therapy. But the development of other skills slowed down because of the business aspect of things. But I definitely am competent. I'm not competent to use EDMR, but I can present. I do know enough to present on it. But DBT and CBT definitely, I can talk about those things. And so the biggest difference from my perspective between DBT and dialectic behavioral therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy is that cognitive behavioral therapy is more rational and logical related, and DBT is more about emotional regulation and mindfulness and things of that sort, regulating one's emotions and reducing certain emotions and inhibitions and things of that sort. That to me is the overall difference. I will actually discuss uh, some of the exercises that I have. I have books. I have about 3 or 4 books. I got about 2 books on between the both. I have several cognitive behavioral books, and I got a couple of dialectic behavioral therapy books, and I use them all interchangeably for adults and children. Okay. Well, I do appreciate each and every one of you for being here. I do appreciate those who have supported the content, and I definitely love the interaction. And also, guys, for those that want more, when I talk about dating coaching and relationships and love related issues, please check out Coach D. Darrell Spears on my Coach D. Darrell Spears channel, because that's another scope of my practice that I do marital counseling all the time, relationship counseling all the time as a licensed clinician. And I do enjoy talking about those things. And I don't want to come off too clinical in the dating coach realm, because I do understand how that field is per se. And I try not to come off too as much as I can. Sometimes I just can't help myself. uh, you know, but I do. She said, I used to get tired of giving me homework. I'm going to be honest. If you're doing cognitive work or dialectic behavioral work, you're going to be giving homework. I give homework. I give written homework and I give practical homework. And I reinforce the need of it being done because you have to do the work to get better. And that's one of the reasons why I am a proponent of cognitive work, is because it's measurable and it forces the client to have to do work. Now that's certain. Now, I'm also proficient in using like a person-centered therapy, which doesn't necessarily it's more about you opening up. I've, and things of that sort. I mean, I've used different types of therapy. Reality therapy will hold you accountable, but I can use those. But I primarily use cognitive behavioral therapy and person-centered therapy for the most part. So with that being said, guys, I do appreciate you all for being here. This is Dempsey Durrell Spears. I am a licensed clinician. Yes, I am. On YouTube, your Black YouTube therapist. You call me the Godfather. You call me Coach D. You all have an excellent day. And I hope you all can reference this presentation for other use. Have a great day.